You ever hear a sentence so insane, so casually cruel, that your brain needs a moment to reboot? Because that's exactly what happened the day my wife looked me dead in the eyes and said, "I get to cheat once for every time you've disappointed me." I'm at 7. I just stared at her, trying to decide if she was joking or if she had finally lost her mind. All I managed to say was, "Then keep counting." I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I didn't ask who the 7 were. I simply got up the next morning, walked into a high-rise downtown office, and hired the most ruthless divorce attorney this city has ever produced, and I paid for it with our joint savings. The moment she realized she couldn't afford a lawyer of her own, that became disappointment number 8. And trust me, if you think that's wild, it only gets worse from here. Mods, this might run long, but every second is worth it. I've been lurking in this subreddit for years, reading other people's train wreck stories, never imagining I'd one day be typing out the downfall of my own marriage. But life has a twisted sense of humor. Like discovering your spouse has been keeping an infidelity scoreboard with your name on it. So buckle up, because what happened next still shocks me when I say it out loud. And by the end of this story, you'll understand exactly why walking away was the easiest decision I ever made. Background. My story starts where most marriages slowly die, with two people drifting apart while pretending everything's fine. I'm 38M. My wife, Elaine, 37F, entered my life 12 years ago at a charity auction. I was there on behalf of my company, the one I'd built from scratch just 2 years earlier, high-end custom sound systems for luxurious homes and elite businesses. She showed up as someone's plus one. Ironically, that someone ditched her at our table to go schmooze for investors. His loss became my turning point. The connection between us was instant, sharp, lightning fast, undeniable. 6 months later, we were living together. 2 years after that, we stood at an altar. Before we said, "I do," I insisted on a prenup. Not because I didn't love her, but because I needed to protect the baby business I'd poured everything into. That little precaution? It would become incredibly important later. Elaine, who has a law degree she never actually practiced, had her own attorney look it over before signing. Everything above board. Our first 5 years were what people dream about. Challenging sometimes, sure, but rooted in love and genuine partnership. I've never claimed perfection. I work long hours, travel for installations, and have tunnel vision when I'm deep in a project, sometimes forgetting dinner plans entirely. But I loved Elaine with everything I had. I truly believe she loved me back. Financial picture. My business did well, comfortable, not billionaire level. We lived in a nice Boston suburb, shared a savings account. I contributed roughly 70% since I earned more, but we both had full access. Elaine was a marketing director for Beacon Hill Luxury Properties, and she excelled at it. She didn't just market homes. She sold lifestyles. Her events were legendary. Yacht parties in the harbor, invite-only dinners with Michelin-starred chefs, private museum previews. That's where Boston's quiet elite moved their money around, and her connections often brought business my way too. Where it fell apart, I can pinpoint the shift like a pin on a map. 3 years ago, Elaine became director. With that title came a huge salary bump and entry into Boston's upper circles. Charity galas, exclusive art openings, late-night yacht socials. I tried attending with her. I really did. But listening to people debate which private school produced the best lacrosse captains, or whose family estate in the Hamptons had a better ocean view, I couldn't fake interest. And honestly, I didn't want to. Elaine, though, she thrived there. Soon she started going alone, saying it was easier to network without having to babysit me. I didn't argue. My work kept me busy, and I was genuinely proud of her success. The issue wasn't her ambition. It was how her new world slowly rewired her expectations of our marriage. The discovery. 8 months ago, I finished a New York installation earlier than expected. Instead of returning the next afternoon, I headed home around midnight to surprise her. Except the surprise was mine. I walked in quietly, only because I didn't want to wake her, but instead of silence, I heard voices from the living room. Elaine's laugh. A man's voice I didn't recognize. At first, nothing felt suspicious. Elaine sometimes hosted colleagues, though rarely this late. But then I heard it. So what's your count now? The man asked. Elaine replied in a playful tone I hadn't heard in years. Including tonight? 7. But who's keeping track? You are? The man chuckled. Remind me, what was disappointment number 7 again? Elaine sighed dramatically. He forgot our anniversary. Texted at 9 p.m. after I sat alone at Sorolina for an hour. The maitre d' gave me free dessert because he felt bad. My whole body went cold. The anniversary, 2 months earlier. I had been drowning in a huge project and genuinely lost track of the date. I apologized, sent flowers, took her out that weekend. She said she'd forgiven me. Clearly, forgiveness was just another lie. And number 6? Christmas at his parents' place, she replied. 5 days in rural Vermont with no cell service and his mother begging for grandkids. That trip? I thought it went beautifully. Elaine smiled. My parents loved her. We talked about kids on the drive home. I actually believed we were on the same page. I should have confronted them. But I didn't. I slipped out, drove to a hotel, and spent the night trying to make sense of what I'd heard. A count? 7? Was it? No. It couldn't be. Later, I learned Elaine thought I wouldn't be home until the following evening. She checked my flight herself. My early return was the one variable she hadn't controlled. Her perfect planning cracked. The confrontation. The next morning, I walked into the house pretending everything was normal. Elaine sat at the kitchen counter, sipping coffee, scrolling calmly. You're early, she said cheerfully, offering her cheek. How was the installation? Fine, I answered. How was your night? Quiet, she said without blinking. Caught up on work. Went to bed early. Her ease with lying hit me harder than the cheating. I asked, who was here last night, Elaine? A flicker crossed her face, gone in an instant. What are you talking about? I came home at midnight. I heard you with a man. You two were discussing your count. 7. Color drained from her cheeks before she straightened her posture and slipped into a cold, defensive version of herself I'd never seen. You were spying on me. I was coming home to my wife, I said, and overheard a conversation that sounded like you've been cheating. Multiple times. Want to explain, or should I call a lawyer? She set her cup down gently as if steadying herself. It's not what you think. Then what is it? Because it sounded like you've been having affairs and keeping score. She stared at me for what felt like forever. Then she let out a humorless laugh. Fine. Yes, I've been with other people. 7. One for every major disappointment you've given me. I sat down before my knees buckled. You're serious? I am. She looked straight at me and said almost casually, you've spent years putting everything ahead of me, your work, your projects, your deadlines. That forgotten anniversary? That was the final straw. I stared at her, trying to process the sheer insanity of what I was hearing. So instead of having a conversation about it or suggesting counseling or, hell, even filing for divorce, your solution was to invent some twisted system that lets you cheat based on how disappointed you felt? She lifted a shoulder in the most infuriating shrug, as though she were talking about a parking ticket, not the obliteration of our marriage. I figured I deserved compensation for the emotional neglect, she said calmly. One encounter for each major disappointment. Simple. Balanced. Fair, I repeated, the word tasting like acid in my mouth. And last night? I asked. That would have been what, disappointment number 7? Marcus, she said without the slightest hesitation. He's a client. She didn't flinch. She didn't look guilty. She looked bored. I never planned for you to find out, she added. It doesn't mean anything. It's just physical. Just physical, I echoed. 7 times. It's not an affair, she insisted. They're separate. They're isolated. No emotions involved. Oh, so I'm supposed to feel better? I said. That you've been sleeping with different men, one by one, like some deranged self-help program for resentment? It's not revenge, she corrected. It's rebalancing. Our marriage was out of alignment. You took me for granted. This is how I kept myself from resenting you. Her voice was calm, reasonable, as if she were explaining a spreadsheet. I stared at her, searching for any trace of the woman I married. And you genuinely don't see anything wrong with this logic? I see it as the solution that kept our marriage functioning, she answered. I get my needs met, I don't build bitterness toward you, and we stay together. Except I didn't agree to this arrangement, I said. That's not marriage, Elaine. That's you deciding unilaterally that cheating is your coping mechanism. She set her jaw. Well, she said, voice cutting cold, now you know. So what are you going to do about it? I looked at the stranger wearing my wife's face and said the only words that came to mind. Keep count. Then I walked out. The plan. I spent that entire day driving with no destination in mind, just miles of road and a mind full of static. By the time the sun set, the shock had burned away and left something clean, cold, and decisive. Our marriage wasn't wounded. It wasn't cracked. It was dead. But I refused to act impulsively. Elaine had revealed her true nature. Calculating, unapologetic, entirely self-serving. If I was going to exit this marriage, I'd need to be strategic. For weeks, I kept a composed exterior whenever we interacted. But privately, I was unraveling. I shredded 3 punching bags at the gym. More than once, I spent 20 minutes sitting in my car outside the house, trying to convince myself to walk inside. My business partner covered multiple meetings because I didn't trust myself not to snap. The next morning, I took a personal day from work. Then I picked up the phone and called Caroline Rothman, the most feared, respected, and ruthlessly effective divorce attorney in Boston. Her retainer made my eyes water. But worth it? Absolutely. I hadn't chosen her on a whim. Years earlier, a mentor had told me, know the best divorce lawyer in your city before you ever need one. So I always kept a quiet, professional awareness of the top names in family law, not out of paranoia but the same way I kept my will and insurance updated. When Elaine revealed her scorecard, I knew exactly who to call. Before touching our joint savings, I asked Caroline if withdrawing funds would be an issue. As long as you're not draining the account or using the money irresponsibly, she said. A joint account can be used for legitimate legal fees. Document everything. Be transparent. Leave a proportionate amount for her. I transferred $35,000 from our joint savings into her retainer that afternoon. A sizable chunk, but far from emptying the account. And Caroline was worth every penny. She charged nearly double what attorneys like Andrew would require. At her office, I told her everything, from the overheard conversation to Elaine's bizarre infidelity math. Caroline took notes with clinical precision. Massachusetts allows both no-fault and fault-based divorces, she explained. While adultery is grounds for a fault filing strategically, a no-fault approach gives us more narrative control. Judges can still consider her behavior during asset division. What kind of evidence do you need? I asked. Texts, emails, hotel charges, any proof that aligns with her admissions. And until the process starts? I asked. We're still living together. Do not move out, she warned. It complicates everything. Stay in the home. Be courteous but distant. Document everything. And no divorce discussions with her. Those go through me. I followed her instructions exactly. The next week felt like living with a ghost I no longer recognized. We shared the same space but barely exchanged words. She watched me, waiting for an explosion or a surrender. She got neither. The breaking point. 10 days later, the silence finally cracked. We were in the kitchen, me assembling a sandwich, her pouring a glass of wine, when she finally said, "So, are we going to talk about this? It's been over a week of whatever this is. What's left to talk about?" I said, keeping my eyes on the cutting board. You've made your position perfectly clear. You believe cheating is your right because I've allegedly disappointed you 7 times. Don't be childish, she snapped. I'm trying to have an adult conversation about our marriage. I met her eyes. Our marriage ended the moment you created that scorecard. You just didn't bother telling me. Really? She said sharply. 12 years just gone? Thrown away. You threw them away, I replied. 7 times. By your own count. She slammed her glass on the counter hard enough that the stem rattled. Fine. If that's how you want to play it, I'll call Andrew tomorrow. Andrew, her friend's husband, a corporate lawyer who occasionally handled divorces for their circle. No need, I said calmly. I've already retained counsel. She blinked, stunned. You what? I hired an attorney yesterday, Caroline Rothman. Maybe you've heard of her. Every drop of blood drained from Elaine's face. Caroline's reputation was legendary in Boston. People didn't just know her name, they feared it. How could you possibly afford Caroline Rothman? She demanded. The retainer came from our savings account, I said, taking a slow bite of my sandwich. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Elaine looked genuinely afraid. Without discussing it with me? That's our money, she snapped, her voice cutting sharp enough to slice the air between us. I didn't flinch. Then think of it as disappointment number 8. Her eyes narrowed into slits. You had no right. Oh, but I did, I said calmly. Joint account. Full transparency. I didn't even touch half, only what I needed for the retainer. And I documented everything, including this wonderful little conversation we're having right now. Completely lawful. Completely clean. Her breath hitched, panic slipping through her polished confidence. Do you have any idea what this will do to my reputation? My career? If this gets out? You should have thought about consequences before you started turning betrayals into some sick numerical hobby. My voice wasn't raised, just steady. Controlled. Actions have a funny way of circling back, Elaine. She shot back. Fine. I'll get my own attorney. I assume you will, I replied, wiping my hands on a napkin. But you might want to check the savings account before dialing anyone. She hesitated. There's about $40,000 left after I retain Caroline, I continued. Andrew charges what, 15? Maybe 20 grand just to get started? You'll manage. Barely. But you'll manage. I watched the exact second she realized the walls were closing in. Her designer lifestyle, her impulsive spending, that endless parade of lunches and weekend escapes. None of it had left her room to breathe now. You planned this, she accused, voice trembling with fury and fear. No, Elaine, I said quietly. You planned it the moment you turned our marriage into a tally sheet. I'm just responding. She grabbed her phone and stormed out, heels stabbing the floor like she wanted to hurt the house itself. I finished my sandwich in complete peace. The fallout. The next few days were a carousel of emotional tactics. Elaine rotated through them like she was checking items off a script. Rage, tears, desperate bargaining, even a painfully transparent attempt at seduction. One night she tried negotiation. We can handle this ourselves, she insisted, folding her arms like that made her reasonable. We don't need to drag in expensive attorneys. We're both rational adults. You justified cheating on me 7 times by inventing an emotional compensation system, I reminded her. That isn't rationality. That's delusion wearing makeup. People make mistakes, she argued. I made 7. Okay, I'll get help. I'll go to therapy. We can do counseling. The time for therapy was before disappointment number 1, I said. Not after number 7. Her expression curdled. You know what? Fine. I've been talking to Andrew and he says. Is Andrew representing you? I asked. A tiny pause. Attell. Well, no. Not officially. Then there's nothing for us to discuss. Any negotiations go through Caroline. She hated that. She hated losing control more than she hated being caught. She tried getting a loan. No luck. Her credit cards were already maxed out from those business trips that doubled as scorecard entries. Her wealthy friends gave polite excuses when she hinted at borrowing. None of them wanted to be anywhere near Caroline's discovery process. Then Caroline called me. Your wife visited 3 of the top firms in Boston today, she said, including mine. I sighed. Trying to conflict me out? It's a tactic, Caroline replied, but she's a step behind. You retained us first. She can't block what's already locked in. 2 weeks after that, the divorce papers finally arrived. By then I'd moved into the guest room. We barely exchanged words, let alone glances. I signed immediately. Elaine stalled, anxious, scrambling, trying to gather leverage she didn't have. Caroline used every day of that delay to build her case like she was constructing a fortress brick by brick. She brought in a forensic accountant who pulled apart the finances with surgical precision. Your 80-hour workweeks and personal reinvestments support a strong argument for special contribution, she explained. Massachusetts courts acknowledged that. Was strange. All those nights I'd thought my dedication was destroying us. Turned out they were protecting me. And then came the part that stunned even me. Elaine, who had cheated 7 times, claimed she deserved more than 50% of the assets because she had supported my business. Caroline dismantled that narrative in minutes. She produced proof that Elaine used my business dinners as opportunities to meet affair partners, and that one disappointment had taken place after a client event I'd missed because I was planning a surprise promotion celebration for her. That dinner ended in a hotel room she put on our joint card. Even the judge looked disgusted. The resolution. The divorce lasted nearly a year, quick honestly for something this messy. Massachusetts has a mandatory waiting period, and Caroline used every day of it to tighten the case. The prenup I'd insisted on before we married, something Elaine had once rolled her eyes at, became the anchor of the settlement. She tried to claim she'd signed under duress. The judge looked at her law degree and dismissed it with barely a breath. 50-50 on marital assets. Business protected. Alimony denied. Her income was within 15% of mine, and experts agreed her luxury real estate career had better future earning potential anyway. And that final accusation, that I had dissipated assets by paying Caroline's retainer? Caroline produced hotel receipts from Elaine's work trips. Case closed. The mandatory 120-day waiting period after the divorce judgment ended up being Elaine's final legal window to contest the settlement. But her attorney quietly advised her to let it go. When the day finally arrived and the divorce became official, I stood outside the courthouse waiting. It was the first time we'd laid eyes on each other in weeks. She'd been staying with a friend ever since the preliminary hearings began collapsing around her. As she stepped out, I offered a calm, "Congratulations." Her expression flickered. I continued, "You're free now. Free to keep your scorecard, without boundaries or consequences." She looked drained, her immaculate marketing director polish stripped away like weathered paint. Bitter exhaustion clung to her voice as she asked, "Are you happy now?" "No," I admitted honestly. "Happy isn't the word. But I am free. Free from someone who thought betrayal could be justified by a point system. That freedom means more than happiness right now." "You could have tried to understand," she murmured, almost pleading. "You could have asked why I felt so disappointed in the first place. You could have talked to me," I countered, "instead of sleeping with 7 different people. Communication isn't a solo sport, Elaine." She shook her head, a weary sigh escaping. "You were always too rigid. Everything was black and white with you." "Fidelity isn't a gray area to me," I said. "Apparently that makes me rigid." She swallowed hard. "For what it's worth, I did love you." "Love isn't a scoreboard," I replied softly. "Goodbye, Elaine." And I walked away without looking back. Aftermath. That was 6 months ago. Since then, I sold our house, a requirement in the settlement since both our names were on the deed. Elaine only agreed to sign the listing documents after negotiating a slightly bigger portion of the proceeds, in exchange for letting me handle everything. Thankfully, the Boston market was on fire. The house had multiple offers within days. I moved into a downtown loft above my new showroom, a place I'd leased quietly 3 months before the divorce was final. By then, I'd already accepted the direction things were headed. Business? Booming. Ironically, several of Elaine's ultra-wealthy clients reached out after our split, privately. Turns out they preferred to work with me directly rather than through her firm. Not because of the divorce, but because they were uncomfortable with how she'd used business events as potential locations for her scorecard encounters. These weren't one-off projects. They were long-term relationships. Multiple homes, vacation properties, sound system upgrades, future investments. Hundreds of thousands in recurring business. Meanwhile, Elaine, according to the grapevine, crafted a revised narrative portraying herself as the heartbroken victim of a cold, workaholic husband who abandoned her emotionally. Predictably, our social circle fractured. Some of her friends swore she'd been justified in seeking validation. Others stayed neutral until neutrality became untenable as details leaked. The most surprising reactions came from her colleagues, women who quietly reached out with sympathy for me. Apparently, Elaine had been preaching her disappointment scorecard concept to other unhappy wives long before our divorce was public, unsettling the group even then. Her social collapse was subtle but brutal. She wasn't openly shunned. No one confronted her. Instead, calls were returned a day later, or not at all. Charity committees, suddenly full, apologized for not having room this season. Clients gently requested someone with more waterfront experience to handle their luxury listings. In Boston's old money circles, this kind of polite distance is equivalent to a public execution. Her real downfall wasn't simply the cheating, it was how she did it. Elaine always believed she lived in perfectly separate worlds, her polished professional image and her messy personal choices. What she didn't understand was that in circles built on reputation and lineage, discretion is oxygen. And she'd suffocated hers. By turning client events into her own personal hunting grounds, she crossed a line people in that world never forgive. She didn't just betray a marriage. She embarrassed people who treat reputation like part of their inheritance. There was one day, one of the worst, after a long court hearing where her attorney tried to paint me as some emotionally unavailable workaholic. Afterward, I sat in my car for hours, staring at the steering wheel, questioning everything. Had I really been that distant? Were her disappointments real grievances I ignored? Was I so blind that I missed her unhappiness entirely? Months of therapy forced me to face a hard truth. I wasn't perfect, but her decision to build a whole system of secret betrayals wasn't a response to my flaws. It was a reflection of hers. And that infamous scorecard she kept? Among our former friends, it eventually became a dark inside joke. Someone even sent me a custom plaque for my new office that read, "Disappointment number 8, realizing actions have consequences." It sits on my desk now, not as a wound, but as a reminder of how far I've risen from the wreckage she created. If this story hit you somewhere deep, don't forget to subscribe to Dark Infidelity Stories, where every betrayal has a backstory, every confession carries a consequence, and every truth comes with a shadow. Tap like, share, and comment below, because sometimes the darkest stories teach the brightest lessons.